Have you ever felt like you are watching a grotesque spectacle, a performance disguised as normality, where the absurd is the only constant? Pay close attention to what happens around you. A click on your phone and images of buried children, ruined cities, screams of pain echoing through blood-soaked streets appear. It is the raw reality, the brutality of human existence being exposed in high definition. But, in the blink of an eye, everything changes. A vibrant, colorful advertisement emerges, full of fake smiles and empty promises. Buy happiness, acquire self-esteem on a credit card, forget the anguish with a weekend trip. It's as if suffering and consumerism have made a silent pact to keep us hypnotized. Pain has become the backdrop, consumption the official distraction. And we go on, passive spectators of a theater where tragedy and comedy alternate in an endless cycle. You feel that discomfort, don't you? That deep, almost physical unease, as if something is fundamentally out of place. As if we are alive only in the biological sense, but dead inside. Dead on purpose, truly dead. Because we repeat patterns we did not choose, we live narratives we did not write, and we move forward even without knowing why. Albert Camus understood this feeling with razor-sharp clarity. He didn't write to comfort. He wrote to disturb. There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, he declared. This statement isn't about statistics or a single dramatic act. It speaks to that quiet, restless question that surfaces in the middle of the night. Why keep going when everything feels so empty in a world so absurd, so meaningless? Here, we can expand Camus' idea beyond its literal reading, pointing to the collapse of authenticity, the slow erosion of our true self. Every time we give up who we are to fit into a society designed to numb us, we lose a part of our essence. This quiet surrender, though invisible, can be devastating, but Camus does not stop at the denunciation. He proposes something infinitely more challenging: to face the absurd with open eyes, not to flee, not to invent comforts, not to cling to metaphysical explanations, just to accept reality as it is, cold, incoherent, indifferent, and yet to live, to choose to live, not for hope, not for promise, but for rebellion. This video is a call, not to believe in something, but to wake up, to think, to feel, and perhaps for the first time, to accept that life does not need an external meaning to be profoundly significant. Meaning is not ready, waiting for you somewhere. Meaning is something you build with courage, with presence, with lucidity. Perhaps by diving into this philosophy, you will realize that living without a cosmic purpose is not a tragedy. It is, in fact, the greatest act of freedom a human being can perform. And that is exactly why this journey needs to start now. Most people are fading away slowly, in suits, smiling for selfies, meeting goals, and being praised for it. They live, but they are not alive. They breathe, but they do not feel. They are functional, but they are not whole. And the scariest part is that this death, the death of the true self, shocks no one. On the contrary, it is rewarded with stability, approval, and likes. Camus understood this before many. When he spoke of the deepest philosophical question, he was pointing to something beyond physical acts. He was pointing to the slow, invisible collapse of authenticity, the quiet fading that happens when you abandon who you are to fit into a mold, when you silence your own questions just to appear well-adjusted, when you trade your curiosity for productivity, your essence for a social role. How many times have you caught yourself acting like a character, performing a script that someone wrote for you? Waking up, working, smiling, being polite, hiding fatigue, silencing anger, ignoring fear. Life turns into a loop of automatic gestures, decisions made by inertia, and feelings swallowed dry. And with each repetition, something inside you fades away, slowly, silently, until the day you look in the mirror and no longer recognize yourself. This is the silent collapse that Camus exposes. An existence without passion, without awareness, without revolt. And he calls it cowardice, because it is easier to settle for a lukewarm life than to face the terror of emptiness. Easier to pretend everything is fine than to dive into the deep doubt. What if none of this makes sense? But here is the key. Recognizing this inner death is the first step to breaking the cycle. The simple fact that you are listening to these words now already shows that something inside you resists, that there is still a spark, a restlessness, a refusal to accept a half-life. And it is from this refusal that true revolt begins. However, before we talk about the conscious rebellion against this daily death, we need to understand the scenario in which all this happens. A cold, indifferent, silent world, where meaning is not given. It is in the collision between the human search for meaning and the silence of the universe that what Camus called the absurd is born, and that is exactly what we will explore in the next part. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you believe to be solid, your goals, your beliefs, your certainties, begins to crumble. Nothing dramatic happened, no tragedy, just silence. An emptiness settles between you and the world. You ask yourself why, but there is no answer. Just noise, just routine, just the mechanical sound of life moving on, indifferent to your anguish. It is precisely here that Albert Camus inserts his notion of the absurd, the clash between the human yearning for meaning and the incomprehensible silence of the universe. We want answers, we need narratives, purpose, direction. But the world simply is. It does not respond, does not explain, does not justify. And this lack of response is unbearable for many, but inevitable for all. Camus does not claim that the world is meaningless out of malice or injustice. It is not cruel. It is indifferent. And this indifference is what makes it absurd. Because we, conscious beings, endowed with a desire for logic and coherence, are condemned to exist on a stage where none of those things are guaranteed. It is as if we are trying to read a book that was written in a language that does not exist. The frustration does not come from the content, it comes from the absence of translation. The absurd is not in the universe, nor in us, but in the relationship between the two. We are meaning-making machines thrown into an environment that offers none. And this, according to Camus, is an inescapable fact. It is not a theory, it is not a hypothesis. It is the basic condition of conscious existence. And what do we do in the face of this? Most try to escape. We lose ourselves in distractions, ideologies, promises of salvation. We seek to numb this existential pain with consumption, religion, status, even toxic optimism. Because looking directly at the absurd requires brutal courage. It demands the ability to hold our gaze on the void without blinking. But Camus believes that it is precisely in this confrontation, in this moment of shock, where the ground disappears and everything seems to collapse, that something powerful can be born. Because if the universe has no meaning, then the only way to continue is to create our own. And this can only happen when we stop fleeing, stop lying to ourselves, stop seeking external answers. It is at this point that we reach the crossroads. In the face of the absurd, we have three possible paths, three human responses to the absence of meaning, and it is about these choices and their consequences that we will talk in the next part. When we finally realize the absurd, when we stop seeking comfort in illusions and face reality without veils, we are thrown into an existential fork. Albert Camus presents us with three possible exits from this brutal impasse between the human thirst for meaning and the indifference of the universe. 3 responses to the void, and each of them reveals not only what we think of life, but how much we are willing to live with honesty. The first option is total surrender. The conclusion that if life has no meaning, then it is not worth continuing. It is the extreme act of an individual who finds no reasons to endure existence and prefers to end it. Camus firmly rejects this exit, not out of moralism, but because he sees it as a gesture of weakness, a premature resignation in the face of a game that has not even begun. Ending one's life is not confronting the absurd, it is running from it. The second exit is what Camus calls philosophical escape, and this is perhaps the most common and the most dangerous. It is when, in the face of the absurd, the individual invents an artificial meaning, clings to a belief, an ideology, a promise of salvation to numb the anguish. Here come dogmatic religions, closed systems of thought, messianic utopias. It does not matter if it is the promised paradise or the perfect revolution. The mechanism is the same, betraying reality to feel secure. But this kind of security comes at a high price, the denial of one's own lucidity. And for Camus, there is no greater dishonesty than lying to oneself just to be able to sleep at night. Thus, the third way remains, the absurd revolt, the hardest path and the most liberating. It is when the individual accepts the absurd as a permanent condition of existence, does not try to explain it nor flee from it, just lives with it, faces it without despair, lives without appeals to transcendental hope, acts without expecting cosmic rewards. It is the bravest act a human being can commit, to continue living even knowing that the universe does not care. This revolt is not aggressive. It is not against the world. It is a yes said to life despite everything. It is to live with intensity, with presence, with awareness, knowing that each gesture is finite, each moment is unique, and that nothing beyond the now is guaranteed. It is to transform the void into a stage for freedom. It is to make life an act of continuous creation, even without a script. But how is it possible to live like this? How to sustain this revolt without falling into despair? Camus answers this question with a powerful symbol, a mythological figure that becomes a metaphor for the human condition, Sisyphus. And it is about him, the eternal condemned one, who pushes his stone up the mountain, that we will talk in the next part. Imagine being condemned to eternally repeat the same task, without reward, without conclusion, without relief. Climbing a mountain while pushing a colossal stone, only to see it roll back to the starting point every time you approach the top. This is the punishment of Sisyphus, the mythological character who dared to challenge the gods. And for that, he was sentenced to live the cruelest cycle that human imagination could conceive. Purposeless repetition, an endless routine, an eternity of futile effort. It is easy to look at this image and see only tragedy. But Albert Camus saw something else. He saw there the purest reflection of the human condition. For Camus, Sisyphus is more than a condemned man. He is a symbol. And more than that, he is a hero. Not in the romantic or epic sense, but in the most brutal and honest sense possible. Sisyphus is the man who faces his absurd reality and chooses to confront it without illusion. He does not believe that the stone will one day stay at the top. He does not deceive himself with promises of liberation. He knows that the punishment is eternal, and it is precisely for this reason that he is free. Because he understands the extent of his tragedy, accepts his fate, and yet continues to push. Camus writes, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy." And this phrase, at first glance so provocative, is an existential punch. How could someone be happy in such a desperate condition? But this is where the genius of the metaphor lies. Sisyphus's happiness is not in winning, it is in not giving up. It is in the moment he descends the mountain and, knowing that the stone will fall again, chooses, nonetheless, to start over. He chooses to push once more, not out of faith, not out of hope, but out of decision. This act, repeated eternally, ceases to be punishment and transforms into affirmation. The awareness of futility does not destroy Sisyphus. The absence of meaning becomes the very ground from which his freedom springs. He takes ownership of his fate. He claims the stone as his own. He transforms punishment into choice, and in doing so, he transcends. He becomes greater than the absurd task imposed upon him. Camus does not present Sisyphus to resign us to suffering. He does so to show that true heroism lies in lucidity, in conscious persistence, in the refusal to flee from reality, no matter how harsh it may be. We all have our stones. We carry weights that return, failures that repeat, routines that seem to lead nowhere. But what defines us is not the inevitability of the fall. It is the decision to climb again. Sisyphus represents the human being who, in the face of the absurd, does not flee, does not delude himself, does not surrender. He resists. And this resistance, even without the promise of glory, is worthy. It is whole. It is beautiful, because it arises from the deepest recognition of reality and, at the same time, from the refusal to be crushed by it. This metaphor is more than philosophy. It is a model for life, a call to authenticity. The stone will continue to fall, but the way you push it can transform everything. The act of carrying with awareness, with style, with intensity, makes the absurd task a sacred ritual, an affirmation of your existence. But if meaning is not in the end, how can it arise? How to live knowing that the stone will always fall? How to find purpose when there is no given purpose? It is in this gap, between the fall and the ascent, that the opportunity to create meaning arises. And it is exactly this that we will explore in the next part. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. The universe owes us nothing, no manual, no explanation, no illuminated path. It simply exists, vast, silent, indifferent. And for many, this realization is unbearable, because we have been taught from an early age to believe that life has a purpose waiting to be discovered, that there is a mission, a destiny, a hidden meaning that, once revealed, will justify all our pains. But Camus shatters this illusion with the coldness of someone who has already crossed the desert. Meaning is not given. It is not hidden in sacred books, nor written in the stars. It simply does not exist. And precisely for that reason, it can be created. This is the most powerful and most frightening proposition that Camus offers us. If there is no universal purpose, then everything depends on us. We are the creators, not of an absolute truth, but of an intimate, personal, conscious meaning. Every act, no matter how small, becomes an affirmation, a refusal of emptiness, a shout against the absurd. This means that even among the ruins, we can build something, and not just anything. We can build a life that truly belongs to us. But this requires a leap of responsibility, because we can no longer outsource who we are. We cannot say, life wanted it this way, or God wanted it this way, or society pushed me into this. From the moment you recognize the absurd, everything you choose to do, or not do, becomes your creation. It is you who decides what matters, what is worth your time, your effort, your affection, your vital energy. And this freedom, although often terrifying, is the only possible path to an authentic existence. This is not an invitation to chaos. It is not live any way you want. It is the opposite. It is live with intention, live with presence. Live knowing that every gesture counts, Not because it will be remembered for generations, but because it is all you have right now. To love someone deeply, to listen attentively, to create art, to defend a cause, to cultivate silence, to take care of the body, the mind, others. All of this can be sacred, if chosen with awareness. Camus calls us to live as artists of our own existence, and like every artist, we need to face the raw material, suffering, failure, fear, loneliness, not to glorify them, but to transform them. Because even in pain there is power, even in collapse there is beauty, even in death there is dignity. Ruin is not the end. It is the open space where we can build something new, something of our own. And this construction does not require great deeds. It happens in the everyday, in the way we face a Monday, in the way we treat a stranger, in the way we react when everything goes wrong. Creating meaning is a constant, silent, personal work. And the more we distance ourselves from others' expectations, the closer we get to our own voice. But to live this way, conscious, present, the author of oneself, one must take a final step, the hardest of all, to stop seeking meaning outside, to abandon the hope for an answer that comes from above, from outside, from the other, and to begin to see the void not as an enemy, but as a space for creation, as fertile ground where freedom can finally blossom. And it is about this last crossing, about how to accept the void as liberation and not as condemnation, that we will talk now in the final part. Because it is at this point that Camus' philosophy transforms, not only into reflection but into living practice, into real courage, into radical freedom. When we finally stop searching for a cosmic meaning, a final explanation, a definitive justification for human suffering, something strange happens. Instead of despair, we feel relief. Relief because at last, we no longer carry the weight of an impossible expectation. Relief because we no longer have to pretend that everything makes sense. Because deep down, you know that much of what you have lived, pain, loss, injustices, never had a greater reason. The truth is that existence is chaotic, indifferent, and relentless. But this doesn't have to be a death sentence. It can be a starting point. The void, that meaningless space where we once projected our hopes, can become fertile ground. A clean terrain, free from the lies we were told about purpose, success, salvation. It is there, in that devastated land, that true freedom is born. Freedom to be who you are, not what others expect you to be. Freedom to choose consciously, to act with presence, to live with intensity, knowing that each moment is all there is. Albert Camus was not a nihilist. He did not say that life is worth nothing. He said that because it is worth nothing in an objective sense, it can come to be worth everything in a subjective sense. It can be worth exactly what you decide it is worth. You define the game. You set the rules. This is not little. This is the greatest act of rebellion possible in a world that constantly tries to program you, silence you, shape you. Living without guarantees, without dogmas, without a promised happy ending is not a condemnation. It is a chance. The chance to live authentically, to be present, to create beauty where there are ruins, to make your own existence an act of art. And this awareness, this serene revolt in the face of the absurd, is what Camus proposes as the pinnacle of human dignity. Now, the choice is yours. You can continue living on autopilot, anesthetized, pretending that everything makes sense. Or you can embrace the absurd and live with courage. There is no script. There is no destination. There is only the now, and what you decide to do with it. If this message has touched you in some way, I invite you to comment below. What have you decided to do with your now? Write. Share your revolt, your doubt, your impulse to live, even without guarantees. And more importantly, stay with us. The next video is essential to deepen this journey even further. You have already begun to awaken. Now, move forward, because real transformation only happens when you continue. And the next step is crucial.